Welcome back, everyone. We hear a lot these days about Democrats embracing socialist ideals, but do they have even the slightest clue about the dangerous philosophy they're espousing? Not knowing or refusing to admit the dangers of socialism is this week's Loony Left. Here is Papa Socialist himself, Bernie Sanders, way back in 1988, talking about the wonders of the USSR, remember, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And then, from the young pioneers more recently, we have AOC on the Berlin Wall. Take a look.
I think it's also fair to point out that when we were in Moscow, for example, I think most of the people here also were extremely impressed by their public transportation system. The stations themselves were absolutely beautiful. Including many works of art, chandeliers that were beautiful. It was a very, very effective system.
No matter how you feel about the wall, you know, I think it's a moral abomination. I think it's like the Berlin Wall.
What Bernie isn't talking about is the fact that the Moscow metro was literally built by slave labor from the Gulag and funded by starving Russians in the countryside to death. But hey, at least it has nice chandeliers. And what AOC doesn't seem to understand is that the Berlin Wall was built by socialists to keep their own people in because socialism is so bad, whereas a US border wall is built to keep illegal immigrants out because capitalism is so good they want to come here. So, who wants to start these people?
You got to love Bernie Sanders. It's 1988 when he's talking about how great the Soviet Union is. 1 year later, the Soviet Union crumbles. I mean, this is how good Bernie Sanders' judgment is. And I mean, I love these old videos because you look back on these things and you think these people have no perspective. I mean, Bernie Sanders is basically the Walter Duranty of his generation, who was a New York Times reporter who did what? He covered up all of Stalin's starvation of 30 million people. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for it, by the way.
So I used to think that these comparisons with socialism and, you know, Venezuela and so on and the old USSR, I thought it was a bit extreme. You know, they're really talking about social democracy in Europe, the Danish policy or whatever. But actually, when you hear, for example, AOC, the way she's talking about the Green New Deal, or as Kimberly Strassel at the Wall Street Journal has brilliantly called it, the Green Leap Forward, like the sort of Chinese communist thing. It's really extreme. They are actually talking about controlling the entire economy.
Yeah, it's almost like a religion, right? It's to change the whole political system from within ideologically. And it filtrates into our system, into our universities, our young people. They begin to espouse these same ideas. It becomes a religious practice, so in a way. And when I heard Bernie Sanders talking about the bread lines, look, my mother came from Cuba. She talked to me about the very beginnings of Fidel Castro. She came in the 1960s from Cuba to the United States, when neighbors would turn neighbors in. This is a system that does not comport whatsoever with U.S. ideals, the foundation of our Constitution. It requires people to turn on each other and for a government to answer for everything. You no longer have a choice, right? You no longer have the choice. It is the government that makes that choice for you, and that changes fundamentally everything.
And that's why everyone wants to leave, and that's why they had to build walls to keep their people in. Tesla, do you think Bernie would be embarrassed by videos showing him praising the Soviet Union?
Yeah, no, he's been pretty consistent, you know, during his entire career. I think what's the difference between then at 2016 and now is no one really vetted these things because they didn't take Bernie Sanders serious. You know, I tell people all the time, I'm not a socialist. You know, I make that clear every time. I was with him because I thought it was ridiculous that only one person was willing to challenge Hillary Clinton. Now that he is clearly the front runner, clearly, whether they want to admit it or not, we'll get a chance to really get into, you know, what he said in the past and what he's praised and how that will really affect Americans. And I think people are going to be shocked to see some of his views, and will that really carry over to the moderate folks in the center when it's time to vote for a general election?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, you're describing my attitude. You know, I like the fact that he was this disruptor, challenging the corruption on the Clinton side, challenging all that, but didn't get the scrutiny, and well, now he is.
The Daily Caller tonight reporting that the Soros-backed Democracy Integrity Project paid firms tied to Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, the foreign agent, a whopping $3.8 million in 2017. Why? To dig up dirt on, quote, government entities. Now, despite all that we have uncovered night after night, James Comey Well, he's continuing to remain defiant, insisting that he has nothing to hide. Tried to remind him many times, Jimbo, you have the right to remain quiet. You may want to exercise that right as you dig a deeper hole every day. Like, oh, signing off on a FISA warrant, saying it's verified, and telling Trump it's salacious but unverified months later. Take a look.
Investigate what? Investigate that investigations were conducted, and what would be the crime you'd be investigating? So it's a terrible cycle to start. He's already started it with calling for the locking up of his political opponents, including people like me. And so it would just be more of that dangerous step. And I would hope, although they continue to disappoint me, the Republicans would finally stand up and say, we don't do that kind of thing. But as me personally, ask me questions. Go ahead. I'd like to answer them in the daylight if I could.
I'd like to see that, too, because now we know a lot more than we did before. Here with reaction, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman, Senator Lindsey Graham. When the president was on this program last week, Senator, the president said very clearly there will be a cascade of information. Doug Collins today releasing yet another closed-door testimony, Bill Priestap, in this particular case, very revealing. Then we're going to get the FISA applications, aren't we? The ones that the Grassley Graham memo said the bulk of information came from the phony Hillary bought and paid for Russian dossier. Interesting. Then we're going to have Gang of Eight information, and we'll get 302 information. Democrats aren't asking for that transparency, but we will get it, and you will continue. You've made that promise to us.
Yeah, well, let me tell you why. Because millions of Americans believe at the top level of the Department of Justice and the FBI, they wanted Clinton to win and Trump to lose. They manipulated the law to let her off, manipulated the facts in the law to go after Trump. And that's a big deal to a lot of people, Republicans and some independents. So I promise you, former Director Comey will get to testify in the light of day. I'll ask him about the dossier. Was it the chief reason you got a warrant against Carter Page? Is it verified to this day? If there's a counterintelligence investigation opened against the Trump campaign, why didn't you tell Trump about it so he could do something like you told Feinstein? And at the end of the day, how could you write that Clinton did nothing wrong even before you interviewed her? And why did you interview her with two people in the room, her aides, and not under oath? Most people don't get that treatment.
All right. So the important thing is your committee will take over where the House Intel Committee left off, so it gives you a big leg up. But then I don't know at what point a lot of this information will be released. I believe the president is serious when he says that that information is coming out. You raise a lot of other questions with Comey. I would argue, as Greg Jarrett and others, lawyers on this program have argued, that there is a vulnerability for Comey. There's a vulnerability for Strzok and Page. There is a vulnerability for McCabe. We know criminal referrals will be coming this week from Devin Nunes, a number of them.
So criminality, it's not my job to find out if crimes were committed. It's my job as oversight of the executive branch. Did they bend the rules? Did they break the rules to get an outcome? Did they mislead the FISA court? Do we need to change the rules about FISA courts? Are there any rules at all about counterintelligence operations? Why didn't you not tell Trump? You told Feinstein she had somebody on her staff working with China. Why didn't you go to Trump and tell him about suspicions about Russia? Was it a backdoor attempt to get in his campaign? Some prosecutor, not a politician, needs to look at Comey, McCabe, and all of these characters to find out if, in fact, they broke the law. And I'm hoping Attorney General Barr will assign somebody to this case with the same resources and commitment to look at them as Mueller had to look at Trump.
Let's look real quickly at the border crisis that is going on, even hearing from Barack Obama's Director of Homeland Security yesterday, Mark, who we had on earlier in the program. Real crisis. But Donald Trump, his veto was not overridden. That money will be reappropriated, $9 billion. The president tried to work with Democrats. The things they say they wanted, they wouldn't sit down with him. In a way, it's actually a bigger victory for the president, more money than he ever dreamed of, probably enough to get a real good chunk of this done and complete. But I think these other countries see what's happening, and they're trying to get to that border as quickly as possible, knowing it won't be open as long as maybe they thought.
So I asked the head of the Border Patrol, do you need a wall? And he said, absolutely. So the president stood firm. He has more money for a wall than he's ever had because he's willing to declare an emergency, and there is one. But he also said, if you don't change our laws, the wall won't work. Right now, if you step 1 foot into the United States and claim asylum, you're entitled to a hearing. We have no place to put you, and we release you in the country. If you come here with children, you can only be held 20 days. We release you because we have no place to put you. That's why we're being overrun by people from the Triangle countries, because we can't deport you back to those countries. If you don't change that, you never fix this, and I hope Democrats will help us.
All right, Lindsey Graham, thank you. We appreciate your commitment to go forward, get to the truth, and those that violated laws, they need to be held accountable. We will do that on this program, as we have promised you.